Marcus Thompson stood in front of his bedroom mirror, adjusting the collar of his charcoal gray cashmere sweater. It was 5:30 a.m. on a crisp autumn morning in New York City, and the streets below his penthouse apartment were still quiet. He deliberately chose comfortable jeans and the sweater instead of his usual tailored suits, a strategic decision he made whenever he conducted his undercover customer experience checks. At 43, Marcus had built Skyway Airlines from a small regional carrier into one of the country's fastest-growing airlines. But success hadn't changed his fundamental belief in staying connected to the real customer experience. His mother's words still echoed in his mind. Never forget where you came from, and always know what your customers are going through. As he packed his carry-on bag, Marcus smiled at the photo on his nightstand, a black and white image of him standing proudly next to his first aircraft, a small twin-engine plane he'd purchased 10 years ago when Skyway was just a dream. That single plane had grown into a fleet of 127 aircraft, serving destinations across 4 continents. Yet here he was, preparing for another mystery shopper-style journey on his own airline. His phone buzzed with a text from James, his head of security, who disapproved of these solo trips. "At least let me send someone to tail you this time, sir," the message read. Marcus typed back a quick "no need" and slipped the phone into his pocket. These experiences needed to be authentic, and having security nearby would defeat the purpose. The drive to JFK International Airport was surprisingly smooth for a Friday morning. Marcus's driver, Pete, who had been with him since the early days, kept glancing in the rearview mirror with concern. "You sure about this, Mr. Thompson? Last time at Denver Airport wasn't exactly pleasant." Marcus chuckled, remembering the incident where he'd been mistaken for a lost economy passenger in the premium lounge. "That's exactly why we need these checks, Pete. Can't fix what we don't know is broken." As they pulled up to Terminal 4, where Skyway operated its main hub, Marcus observed the early morning hustle. Business travelers rushed past with their rolling suitcases, families caroled sleepy children, and airline staff hurried to their posts. The giant Skyway logo gleamed above the entrance, a stylized eagle in flight that Marcus had designed himself on a napkin during his early planning days. He grabbed his carry-on bag, declined Pete's offer to escort him inside, and joined the stream of passengers entering the terminal. The familiar scent of coffee from airport cafes mixed with the distinctive airport air conditioning hit him as he walked through the automatic doors. Several Skyway advertisements lined the walls, including one displaying the company's latest slogan, "Skyway, where everyone soars." Marcus allowed himself a small smile at the irony. At this early hour, the check-in area was already bustling with activity. Marcus positioned himself in the business class line, deliberately standing behind a white couple in matching golf attire and in front of a young Asian woman in a sharp business suit. He pulled out his ticket and passport, maintaining the relaxed demeanor of a regular passenger. What made these mystery checks particularly effective was his appearance. Today, his casual attire and relaxed demeanor made him indistinguishable from any other traveler. There were no outward signs of his success, no expensive watch, no designer luggage, just a man in jeans and a sweater with a standard carry-on bag. The couple ahead of him was processed quickly, their golf bags checked with extra care and courtesy. As Marcus stepped forward, he noted the check-in agent's name tag, Sandra. She was new. He didn't recognize her from his previous visits to this terminal. Her eyes flicked briefly over his casual attire before settling on his business class ticket with a subtle change in expression. Marcus had learned to read these micro-expressions well over the years. It was the slight narrowing of the eyes, the almost imperceptible tightening of the lips, signs he'd become all too familiar with throughout his journey from a small-town kid to a major airline CEO. As he handed over his ticket and passport, Marcus maintained his relaxed posture while mentally preparing for what might come next. These moments were crucial. They revealed the true face of his airline service, unfiltered by the knowledge of who he really was. Whatever happened in the next few minutes would either validate his training programs or highlight where they needed improvement. Little did Sandra know that the man standing before her in casual weekend wear owned not just the ticket in his hand, but the entire airline whose uniform she wore. Sandra's fingers hovered over her keyboard as she examined Marcus's business class ticket with increasing skepticism. Her eyes darted between his casual attire and the premium booking details on her screen, a frown slowly forming on her face. The morning light streaming through the terminal's windows cast a harsh glare on her computer monitor as she began what would. There seems to be some confusion with your tickets, sir, Sandra said, her tone carrying a hint of condescension. This shows a business class booking. She emphasized the words business class as if they were somehow incompatible with the person standing before her. Marcus maintained his calm demeanor, though he noted how different this interaction was from the quick, friendly service the golf-attired couple had received just moments before. Yes, that's correct, he replied simply, watching as she began typing furiously into her computer. Behind him, the Asian woman in the business suit shifted impatiently, checking her watch. Sandra noticed this and smiled apologetically at her over Marcus's shoulder, as if to say, "Don't worry, I'll sort this out quickly." The implied message wasn't lost on Marcus. He was being treated as an inconvenience, a problem to be solved. "Could you show me the credit card you used for this purchase?" Sandra asked, despite this not being standard protocol for business class check-in. Marcus noticed how her hand was already reaching for the phone to call a supervisor, even before he could respond. "I don't see why that's necessary," Marcus replied calmly, maintaining eye contact. "Is this a new policy for all business class passengers?" He glanced meaningfully at the Gulf couple who were now comfortably making their way through security, their check-in process having been seamless and question-free. Sandra's cheeks flushed slightly, but she persisted. "Sir, we just need to verify some information. Perhaps there's been a mistake with the booking class. We have some excellent economy seats available that might be more." She paused, searching for the right word, suitable. By now, other passengers were watching the interaction with varying degrees of interest. A few had their phones out, recording what they likely perceived as another instance of racial profiling at an airport, sadly, not an uncommon occurrence. The supervisor, a man named Richard Phillips according to his name tag, approached with the practiced stride of someone used to handling difficult situations. His navy blue uniform was pristinely pressed, and his demeanor suggested he'd already decided the outcome of this interaction before reaching the counter. "Is there a problem here?" Phillips asked, directing his question to Sandra rather than Marcus, despite Marcus being the customer in question. "This gentleman has a business class ticket that we need to verify," Sandra explained, emphasizing verify in a way that made it sound like code for something else entirely. Marcus watched as Phillips glanced at his computer screen, then at Marcus's casual attire, making the same assumptions his colleague had. The supervisor's next words were delivered with practiced authority. "Sir, there seems to be an irregularity with your booking. Perhaps we can step aside and discuss some alternative arrangements." Several phones were definitely recording now. Marcus could see at least 3 passengers openly filming the interaction, while others watched with expressions ranging from sympathy to discomfort to outright indignation on his behalf. "What exactly is irregular about my booking, Mr. Phillips?" Marcus asked, his voice remaining steady but taking on a slight edge of authority that made both airline employees pause. "Is it the payment method? The booking class? Or is there something else about my appearance that makes you question my ticket's validity?" The subtle emphasis on appearance caused Phillips to shift uncomfortably. Sandra had stopped typing and was now looking between her supervisor and the passenger with growing uncertainty. "Sir, we simply need to follow protocol," Phillips began, but Marcus cut him off with a raised hand. "I've been flying business class for 15 years, Marcus stated, his voice carrying just enough to reach the growing audience of onlookers. "I'm curious to know if this protocol applies to all your business class passengers, or if I'm receiving special attention for some other reason." The tension in the air was palpable. Several other Skyway employees had noticed the commotion and were watching from their stations, whispering among themselves. The Asian businesswoman behind Marcus had stopped checking her watch and was now openly recording the interaction on her phone, her expression one of clear disapproval toward the airline staff's behavior. What happened next would not only change the dynamics of this interaction, but would send ripples through the entire airline industry. The situation at the check-in counter had drawn quite a crowd, with Phillips and Sandra growing increasingly uncomfortable under the watchful eyes of dozens of passengers. Phillips cleared his throat and tried a different approach, lowering his voice as if sharing a confidence. "Sir, you understand we have to be thorough with our premium cabin verifications," he said, though everyone within earshot knew this level of scrutiny was far from standard procedure. Perhaps if you could show us some additional identification or your company travel authorization. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out his passport again, placing it deliberately on the counter. This is the same identification that was sufficient for every other passenger I've observed this morning. Would you like to explain why it's suddenly insufficient for me? A young black family passing by slowed their pace, the parents exchanging knowing looks. The father shook his head slightly, all too familiar with the scene unfolding before him. His teenage daughter had already pulled out her phone, adding to the growing number of people recording the incident. Sandra, seemingly sensing the precariousness of the situation, attempted to backtrack. Sir, we're just trying to ensure everything is in order. Our business class experience is very particular, and we want to make sure all our passengers are comfortable. Comfortable, Marcus repeated the word thoughtfully. And what exactly about my presence would make other passengers uncomfortable, Sandra? His question hung in the air like a heavy weight, making both airline employees squirm. Phillips attempted to regain control of the situation. Sir, if you could just step aside for a moment. No, Marcus interrupted firmly but politely. I will not step aside. I have a valid business class ticket, proper identification, and I'm here well ahead of my flight time. I'd like you to explain, specifically, what protocol requires you to verify my ticket in ways you haven't done for other passengers. The growing crowd had become impossible to ignore. A distinguished-looking older woman in a business suit stepped forward. I've been watching this entire interaction, she announced, identifying herself as a corporate attorney. And I haven't seen you subject any other business class passengers to this level of scrutiny. This is textbook discriminatory treatment. Phillips began to sweat visibly. Ma'am, this is a private matter between the airline and our passenger. Is it private? Marcus asked, his voice carrying clearly. Or is it a systematic issue that needs to be addressed? He turned slightly to address the onlookers. How many of you have witnessed different treatment at airports based on appearance? Several hands went up, and murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. The scene was taking on the feeling of an impromptu town hall meeting rather than a simple check-in dispute. Sandra, looking increasingly distressed, began rapidly typing on her keyboard again. Sir, I'm sure we can sort this out. Let me just verify your booking one more time. You verified it 3 times already, Marcus pointed out. The booking hasn't changed in the last 10 minutes. What has changed is that you now have an audience watching how you handle this situation. A new figure appeared on the scene, Janet Chen, the terminal operations manager. She'd been alerted by another employee about the growing crowd and potential PR situation unfolding at the check-in counter. Her face showed immediate concern as she took in the scene, the crowd with their phones out, the frustrated passenger being denied proper service, and her 2 flustered employees making the situation worse by the minute. What seems to be the problem here? Janet asked, trying to project calm authority. Before Phillips could respond, Marcus turned to face her directly. The problem, Ms. Chen, appears to be that your staff needs a refresher course in both customer service and non-discriminatory practices. I've been standing here for 15 minutes trying to check in for a flight with a valid business class ticket while watching other passengers proceed without question. Janet's eyes widened slightly as she processed the scene before her. She was experienced enough to recognize the potential magnitude of the situation, especially with so many witnesses recording every moment. Sir, please accept our apologies for any inconvenience, she began, but Marcus held up his hand. I'm not interested in apologies yet, he said firmly. What I'm interested in is understanding why your staff felt it necessary to create special requirements for my check-in process. Requirements that somehow didn't apply to any other business class passengers this morning. The next few moments would prove crucial, not just for this immediate situation, but for the entire airline's future approach to customer service and equal treatment. Janet Chen's face paled as she watched Sandra pull up the payment verification screen, something rarely done at check-in unless there was suspected fraud. The crowd had grown larger, with even some of the duty-free shop employees stepping out to watch the unfolding drama. The morning sunlight streaming through the terminal's windows seemed to spotlight the scene like a stage. Ms. Chen, Marcus said calmly, your staff has now requested to verify my payment method. Could you explain why this is necessary when the ticket has already been issued and confirmed? His voice remained level, but there was an underlying authority that made Janet look more closely at him. An elderly man in the crowd spoke up, his voice carrying years of similar experiences. "I've been flying business class for 40 years, and I've never once been asked to show my payment method at check-in. Not once." Phillips, still trying to maintain control of the situation, made things worse by attempting to justify their actions. "Sir, we have protocols for suspicious bookings." "Suspicious?" Marcus interrupted, raising an eyebrow. "Please explain what makes my booking suspicious. Is it the time I booked? The route? The class of service? Or is there perhaps another factor you'd like to elaborate on in front of all these witnesses?" The word witnesses caused Sandra to stop typing abruptly. Several people in the crowd nodded appreciatively at Marcus's handling of the situation. A young woman in a business suit was openly taking notes on her phone, her press badge partially visible on her belt. Janet tried to salvage the situation. "Sir, I'm sure we can expedite your check-in process immediately." "That's not the point anymore," Marcus replied, his voice carrying enough authority to make everyone listen. "The point is that your staff has created arbitrary barriers for me that weren't applied to other passengers. I'd like to know why." The Asian businesswoman who had been waiting behind Marcus stepped forward. "I have footage of the entire incident," she announced, "including the smooth check-in process for the previous passengers compared to this discriminatory treatment." Phillips began to stammer. "We weren't. That's not what. We just needed to follow." "Follow what?" Marcus pressed. "What exactly were you following? Because it certainly wasn't standard check-in protocol." By now, several more senior airline staff had gathered at the periphery of the scene, whispering urgently among themselves. One was frantically making a phone call, likely to corporate headquarters. Sandra, looking increasingly distressed, tried one last time to regain control. "Sir, if we could just verify the last 4 digits of your credit card." "No," Marcus stated firmly. "That's not going to happen. What is going to happen is this. You're going to process my check-in just like you did for every other business class passenger this morning. Or," he paused meaningfully, "we can escalate this situation further. Your choice." The crowd had grown so quiet you could hear the distant announcements echoing through the terminal. Janet Chen looked between her staff and the seemingly ordinary passenger who carried himself with such confidence and authority. Something wasn't adding up. "Mr. Phillips," Marcus continued, "while Ms. Chen processes my check-in, perhaps you'd like to explain to everyone here why you felt it necessary to suggest I might be more comfortable in economy class? What exactly led you to make assumptions about where I would be comfortable?" Phillips opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, realizing there was no acceptable answer to that question. A young black executive in the crowd called out, "We all know why. Same reason I get randomly selected for additional screening every time I fly." The murmurs of agreement from the crowd grew louder. Janet Chen could see the situation spiraling into a full-blown PR crisis. She stepped forward, physically placing herself between Marcus and her staff. "Sir, please allow me to handle your check-in personally," she said, her voice carrying a note of desperate professionalism. Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Of course. Though I'm curious, will you also need to verify my payment method, check my company authorization? Suggest a more suitable seating arrangement?" The sarcasm wasn't lost on anyone. Several people in the crowd actually applauded softly. The young journalist was now openly recording everything on her phone, her press badge fully visible. What no one in the terminal realized was that this incident was about to become much more than a typical case of airport discrimination. In fact, it was about to transform into one of the most significant moments in commercial aviation history. Marcus reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. The leather was worn but expensive, though that detail had escaped notice until now. With deliberate slowness, he removed not a credit card, but a simple business card. He placed it on the counter, sliding it toward Janet Chen with one finger. The change in Janet's expression was immediate and dramatic. Her eyes widened as she read the card, then read it again, her face straining of all color. She looked up at Marcus, then back at the card, then up again. Her hands began to tremble slightly. Mr. Thompson," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. We... Oh my God." Phillips, confused by his supervisor's reaction, leaned over to look at the card. The moment he saw it, he physically stumbled backward, catching himself on the counter's edge. Sandra, still seated at her terminal, craned her neck to see what had caused such a reaction. When she finally saw the card, she let out an audible gasp. The business card was simple but elegant. Black text on cream paper read, Marcus Thompson, CEO and majority owner, Skyway Airlines Group. The crowd, unaware of what had caused the sudden change in the staff's demeanor, pressed closer. The journalist in the crowd sensed something significant was happening and pushed her way forward. Is everything all right, Ms. Chen? Marcus asked, his voice carrying the same calm authority it had held throughout the encounter, but now everyone understood its source. You seem surprised to find the owner of your airline flying his own planes. The word owner rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. Phones were raised higher, recording with renewed interest. Sandra had gone completely pale, her hands frozen over her keyboard. Phillips looked like he might be sick. Janet Chen tried to recover her composure, but her voice shook as she spoke. Mr. Thompson, sir, I cannot begin to express our profound apologies for this inexcusable situation. Actually, Marcus interrupted, picking up his business card and returning it to his wallet. You can begin. You can begin by explaining to me why any passenger, regardless of who they are or what they're wearing, should be subjected to this kind of discriminatory treatment at one of my airports. The word "my" hung in the air like a thunderclap. Several of the observers who had been filming quickly realized they were capturing a viral moment in the making. The young black family who had stopped earlier now stood transfixed, the parents exchanging glances that mixed disbelief with satisfaction. Sandra began to cry quietly at her station, the full weight of her actions sinking in. Phillips had backed away entirely, looking very much like someone who wished the ground would open up and swallow him whole. Other Skyway employees who had gathered at the edges of the scene now stood frozen, watching their CEO handle a situation that would undoubtedly become a teaching moment for years to come. Sir, Janet tried again, if you'll allow me to escort you to our premium lounge personally. No, thank you, Marcus replied firmly. I'll wait here until we address this situation properly. You see, I make a habit of flying incognito on my own airline regularly. It helps me understand the real customer experience. Not the carefully curated version presented to the CEO, but the genuine experience our passengers receive. He turned to address the crowd directly. What happened here today is unfortunately not unique. It's not even rare, but what makes this situation different is that today, we have the opportunity to do something about it. The terminal had gone eerily quiet, with even passing passengers stopping to listen. The only sounds were the distant airport announcements and the occasional click of phones taking photos. Miss Chen, Marcus continued, turning back to the terminal manager, please gather your entire staff. We're about to have an impromptu training session on customer service and unconscious bias. And yes, he added, looking at his watch, I'm aware I might miss my flight. As the owner of the airline, I think I can arrange alternative transportation. A ripple of nervous laughter went through the crowd, but everyone knew they were witnessing something significant. This wasn't just about one check-in gone wrong. It was about to become a moment of real change in the airline industry. Janet Chen nodded rapidly, already reaching for her radio to summon her staff. What had started as a routine morning at JFK was about to become one of the most memorable days in Skyway Airlines history. Within 15 minutes, the check-in area had transformed into an impromptu classroom. Marcus stood at the center, surrounded by 30-plus Skyway Airlines employees who had been hastily gathered from various parts of the terminal. The regular check-in counters had been temporarily closed, with signs directing passengers to alternative positions. The regional manager, David Foster, had arrived breathless and disheveled, having broken several speed limits getting to JFK after receiving urgent calls about the situation. He found his CEO standing calmly in the middle of what looked like a crisis management scene, though Marcus appeared to be the only calm person present. My team, Marcus began, his voice carrying easily across the now hushed terminal. Today we've witnessed something that happens far too often in our industry. The difference is, today we have an opportunity to learn from it directly. Sandra sat in her chair, tears still silently rolling down her cheeks. Philip stood awkwardly to the side, his earlier authority completely deflated. Janet Chen had positioned herself slightly behind Marcus, looking like she was preparing for her last day at work. I'm not here to fire anyone, Marcus announced, causing visible relief among the staff. I'm here to teach, to learn, and to make sure this becomes a turning point for our airline. He pulled out his phone and showed them his booking app. I regularly fly on our airlines under different names, wearing different clothes, presenting different appearances. Would you like to know what I've learned? The staff shifted uncomfortably, but all eyes were fixed on him. The crowd of passengers had mostly remained, sensing they were witnessing something important. I've learned that a businessman in a suit gets offered an upgrade before he even asks. I've learned that a woman traveling alone gets treated differently depending on how she's dressed. I've learned that the color of someone's skin can determine how many times their ID gets checked. He paused, letting his words sink in. These aren't policies we teach, they're biases we carry, and today we're going to start addressing them. David Foster stepped forward. Sir, I take full responsibility for my staff's actions. If you want resignations, what I want, Marcus interrupted firmly, is change. Real, lasting change. He turned to Sandra, who flinched slightly. Sandra, please stand up. She rose shakily, clearly expecting the worst. Tell me, Marcus said gently, what was your first thought when you saw me approach your counter with a business class ticket? The terminal was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. Sandra swallowed hard before speaking. I thought there must be a mistake, she admitted, her voice barely audible. And why was that? Because, she struggled, then straightened her shoulders, deciding honesty was her only option. Because you didn't look like our usual business class passengers. And what do our usual business class passengers look like? Marcus pressed. The silence was deafening. Several employees looked at their feet, others shifted uncomfortably. This, Marcus addressed the entire group, is where real change begins. With honesty, with acknowledgement, with understanding our own biases so we can address them. He walked over to his carry-on bag and pulled out a laptop. I hadn't planned to do this today, but sometimes the best lessons are unplanned. For the next hour, we're going to have a real conversation about customer service, about dignity, and about treating every passenger with the respect they deserve, regardless of their appearance. Janet Chen stepped forward tentatively. Sir, what about your flight? Marcus smiled. As I mentioned earlier, I own the airline. I think we can arrange another flight. This is more important. He opened his laptop and connected it to one of the counter displays, which now showed the Skyway Airlines training homepage. Let's begin with our company's core values. Can anyone recite them? A young baggage handler raised his hand hesitantly. Respect, excellence, and service for all, he quoted. For ALL, Marcus emphasized, not just for those who fit our preconceived notions of what a premium passenger should look like. The impromptu training session was about to begin, and everyone present knew they were participating in something that would change not just their airline, but potentially the entire industry's approach to customer service and equal treatment. David Foster had already pulled out his own laptop, preparing to take notes. This wasn't just damage control anymore. It was about to become a masterclass in leadership and corporate responsibility, delivered by the one person they least expected to encounter on a routine Friday morning. The training session had evolved into something much more powerful than anyone expected. For nearly 2 hours, Marcus transformed the check-in area into an open forum where employees felt safe sharing their own experiences with bias, both as recipients and, more importantly, as unconscious perpetrators. Let me tell you a story, Marcus said, standing near the counter where the incident began. 10 years ago, before I owned Skyway, I was denied entry to my own company's board meeting. The security guard insisted I must be in the wrong place, despite my name being on the building directory as CEO. The employees listened intently as he continued. That guard wasn't a bad person. He was working from assumptions that a CEO couldn't look like me. Today, we all saw those same assumptions in action. Sandra, who had stopped crying and was now taking detailed notes, raised her hand tentatively. Mr. Thompson, how do we overcome these biases when they're so deeply ingrained? Marcus smiled encouragingly. That's exactly the right question. First, we acknowledge they exist. Second, we question our initial reactions. Third, we create systems that help prevent our biases from affecting our actions. He walked over to his laptop and pulled up a new presentation. Starting today, Skyway is implementing new check-in protocols. All verification procedures will be standardized across all passengers, regardless of appearance, dress, or travel class. If we don't check something for one passenger, we don't check it for any passenger. The regional manager, David Foster, was frantically typing on his tablet. Sir, should we distribute these new protocols to all our terminals immediately? No, Marcus replied thoughtfully. First, we're going to perfect them right here. This terminal will be our pilot program. Everyone in this room is now part of the Skyway Customer Experience Task Force. A visible surge of pride went through the assembled staff. What had started as a potential career-ending disaster was transforming into an opportunity to create real change. Janet Chen stepped forward with newfound confidence. Sir, I have some suggestions based on my years of experience with customer complaints. May I share them? Please do, Marcus encouraged, gesturing for her to take the floor. For the next hour, the staff engaged in genuine problem-solving. The young journalist who had witnessed the entire incident was allowed to stay, taking notes with Marcus's permission. She watched as frontline employees suggested practical solutions, shared difficult experiences, and worked together to craft new approaches to customer service. Phillips, who had been quiet for most of the session, finally spoke up. Mr. Thompson, I need to apologize. Not just for today, but for every time I've made assumptions about passengers based on their appearance. I never thought about it from their perspective. Marcus walked over and placed a hand on Phillips's shoulder. Recognition is the first step toward change. You're not alone in this learning process. The young black family who had witnessed the initial incident had remained throughout the entire training. Marcus invited them to share their experiences as frequent flyers, providing valuable perspective from the customer's point of view. What's happening here today, Marcus addressed the group, isn't just about airline protocol. It's about human dignity. Every person who walks through these doors deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of how they look, what they wear, or which cabin they're flying in. He pulled up one final slide on his presentation. Starting today, Skyway is establishing a new position at every major terminal, Customer Experience Officer. Their job will be to monitor and ensure fair, equal treatment of all passengers. And, he smiled at the assembled staff, these positions will be filled by people who have learned these lessons firsthand. The implications weren't lost on anyone. This wasn't just a training session. It was the beginning of a new chapter in Skyway's history. Before we end this session, Marcus announced, I want everyone to write down one commitment, one specific thing you'll do differently starting today. This isn't about corporate policies. It's about personal responsibility. As the employees began writing, Marcus turned to Janet Chen. Ms. Chen, please arrange a follow-up meeting for next week. We're not done here. We're just getting started. The terminal had begun returning to its normal operations, but everyone present knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. What had begun as a discriminatory incident had transformed into a watershed moment for corporate accountability and social change. Marcus finally checked his watch. I believe I have a flight to catch, he said with a smile, and this time I expect the check-in process to be exactly the same as it would be for any other passenger. 6 months after the incident at JFK, Marcus Thompson stood at a podium in Skyway Airlines headquarters, addressing a room full of journalists, industry leaders, and airline executives. The story of what had happened that morning had gone viral, reaching millions of views across social media platforms and sparking a national conversation about discrimination in the travel industry. In the audience, Sandra and Phillips sat in the front row, now wearing badges that identified them as customer experience officers. Their roles had transformed from that challenging morning into positions of leadership in Skyway's new initiative. Janet Chen, now the National Director of Customer Experience Training, stood confidently beside the stage. In the past 6 months, Marcus continued, we've trained over 15,000 employees across 47 airports. Our new standardized check-in protocols have reduced customer complaints by 78%, and our customer satisfaction ratings have reached an all-time high. He clicked to the next slide, showing statistics that made the audience murmur in appreciation. But numbers don't tell the whole story. The real change is in the daily experiences of our passengers. The screen displayed testimonials from travelers of diverse backgrounds, all sharing positive experiences about the noticeable change in how they were treated at Skyway terminals. The young black family from the original incident appeared in one video, now serving as regular consultants for the airline's training programs. We've established customer experience officer positions at every major terminal, Marcus explained. These officers ensure that our commitment to equal treatment isn't just a policy on paper, it's a reality in practice. The journalist who had witnessed the original incident, now working on a documentary about corporate responsibility, sat in the audience taking notes. Her initial viral video of the JFK incident had helped spark the conversation that led to these changes. But perhaps the most significant change, Marcus continued, is that other airlines are following our lead. He gestured to the airline executives in the audience. Today, I'm announcing the formation of the Airline Industry Equality Initiative, a partnership between major carriers to standardize fair treatment protocols across the entire industry. The announcement was met with enthusiastic applause. David Foster, now promoted to Executive Vice President of Customer Relations, stepped forward to present the initiative's detailed implementation plan. Marcus then shared something personal. When I started Skyway Airlines, my goal was to build not just a successful company, but one that would make a difference. Sometimes it takes a moment of crisis to show us the path to real change. He clicked to a final slide showing before and after training statistics across all airports where Skyway operated. The improvement in customer satisfaction scores, particularly among minority passengers, was dramatic. 6 months ago, I walked into JFK Airport dressed in casual clothes, carrying a business class ticket. What happened next could have ended with a few firings and a public apology. Instead, it became the beginning of a movement. The screen behind him showed photos from training sessions across the country, including the original impromptu session at JFK. Sandra and Phillips could be seen in several images, now teaching others about unconscious bias and equal treatment. Today, every Skyway employee undergoes our new comprehensive training program. Every check-in counter follows the same protocols for every passenger, and every customer can expect the same level of respect, regardless of their appearance, dress, or travel class. Marcus paused, looking out at the assembled crowd. But we're not done. This is just the beginning. Because true change isn't about one policy or one training program. It's about continuously examining our assumptions, questioning our biases, and striving to be better. The presentation concluded with the announcement of Skyway's new scholarship program, designed to increase diversity in aviation leadership positions. The young baggage handler who had quoted the company's core values during the original training session was introduced as one of the first recipients. As the event ended and journalists gathered for questions, Marcus noticed a familiar face in the crowd, the security guard who had once denied him entry to his own board meeting. The guard now served as a senior trainer in Skyway's customer experience program, using his own story to teach others about the impact of unconscious bias. The incident that began with a denied business class seat had transformed into something far more significant, a movement that was changing not just one airline, but an entire industry's approach to customer service and equal treatment.